Now we should turn to the third dimension of our definition. Theological propositions make theological claims. As we put it in our definition, theological propositions don't just make factual claims. They make factual theological claims. Now, it's true that systematic theologians refer to facts of history and to philosophical concepts that don't fit neatly under the rubric of theology. But their main subject matter is theology. Now, to understand what we mean by theological facts, we must remember that theology is a rather broad topic. You'll recall that Thomas Aquinas defined theology as having two main concerns. In Book 1, Chapter 1, Section 7 of his Summa Theologica, Aquinas called theology sacred doctrine and defined it as a unified science in which all things are treated under the aspect of God, either because they are God Himself or because they refer to God. Aquinas' words reflect a common distinction in systematic theology between theology proper, which is the study of God Himself, and general theology, the study of other subjects as they relate to God. In line with this common distinction, systematics focuses on both of these levels of theology. On the one hand, systematicians focus attention on theology proper by making statements that directly concern God. They say things like, God is holy, or God created the world. But on the other hand, in a broader sense, systematic theologians also concern themselves with general theology, claims about aspects of creation as they relate to God. Regarding salvation, they often say things like, salvation is by the grace of God. Or concerning the condition of humanity, they often say things like, all people living today are sinners. In this sense, theological propositions address more subjects than God Himself, but always, at least implicitly, in the context of their relationship to God. In the fourth place, it's important to note that systematic theologians seek to express their views with heightened concern for being direct or straightforward. Of course, we all realize that no description of anything, certainly not of God, is absolutely perfect. But at the same time, systematicians strive to be as direct as possible as they form theological propositions. It would be quite unusual for a systematic theologian simply to say, the Lord is a shepherd, and to leave it at that. This statement is true to the Scriptures, but systematicians tend to avoid indirect ways of putting things, like metaphors and other figures of speech. So rather than saying, the Lord is a shepherd, systematicians tend to restate the matter more directly by saying something like, God has special providential care for His people. They want to express themselves as much as possible in explicit, straightforward, prosaic propositions. To sum up, we need to keep in mind that we are focusing on a rather specific kind of expression that dominates systematic theology. For our purposes, we may think of theological expressions as indicative sentences that assert as directly as possible at least one factual theological claim. With our basic definition in mind, we should turn to a second facet of our general orientation toward this subject. What is the justification for building theology with propositions? What makes this process legitimate? Throughout church history, Christians have often expressed their faith in the form of straightforward statements. Listen, for instance, to the opening of the 4th century Nicene Creed. I believe in one God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, and of all things visible and invisible. The Nicene Creed also lists a number of other very important theological propositions. It and many similar creeds have been endorsed by Christians throughout the centuries. At the same time, throughout history, there have been those who have questioned the legitimacy of using theological propositions. For our purposes, we will mention two major objections that have been raised. On the one hand, challenges that rise from the doctrine of divine incomprehensibility, and on the other hand, challenges of modern scientific rationalism. Consider first how the doctrine of God's incomprehensibility has raised questions. We're all familiar with the well-known words of Isaiah chapter 55, verses 8 and 9, the bedrock of this doctrine. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. Unfortunately, in many circles, this and similar passages have been used to support the idea that God is so far beyond our mental capacities that we simply cannot describe Him.